government will do have this idea like the population are their own people. The state wouldn't do that to their own people, and I think we just need to get over that they don't regard us as or those people as their own people. The idea of citizenship is something that means a great deal to the people who are abusing that power.
You know, overcoming the sense that we all have atomization, we're not connected, and it's rebuilding those horizontal ties between one another. It's really important. Like I found the strongest community I have is in Vancouver where I work. Twice a week we meet on Wednesdays and Sundays, and it's not like a religious gathering, but it's kind of oriented that way. It's a sacred circle, right? And a lot of Native people, non-Native are there. But mostly we use it as a way to just struggle with this stuff with each other and share our deepest feelings about how it is to live in this world and struggle with trying to get some justice and help for children and other people, right? So I think meeting regularly is really important, because when you do and what I get frustrated doing, I'll come into a city and give a talk, and then I always try to arrange follow-up after, but I can't always. In a lot of cases, just financial, I can't get around to all these places. So try to set up groups that are committed to helping one another and working together and meeting regularly and just struggling over stuff, because like you say, especially if you have a family, so much of your life, not accidentally, it's just you're so preoccupied with surviving that you don't have time for any of this. You just want to collapse and forget about everything because you're so tired and exhausted by the system. So we can break that down, begin to break that, not break it down, but build up an alternative, because people need alternatives if they're going to change. It's not that people are conservative or indifferent. I think it's just that they don't see any alternative to what exists, and we can start creating that for people. Then they start acting, and I've seen that happen a lot. And in fact, there's what I didn't mention. It's like one of the projects I work on. We put together film training for young Aboriginal people, because the younger Aboriginal people are not as kind of psychologically damaged as the older ones, and they're gradually recovering themselves. And so we give film training, and we have a video library where they can go out into the community, film their lives, film their friends, record the elders and the stories about the residential schools. We have a video library, right? We use that as a resource, because then they're doing something in the community to document it. And that's one example of what you do, but you see a lot of progress on the ground. When you're talking generally about the issue, you don't see it, but when you're working day by day with people, you see the changes, and that's what I need to keep going. You can't do it just on willpower. You need the examples of how people are changing, and so that's what I think we should try to build.
Well, I mean, just in our own little way here, what we are trying to do is actually give people alternatives in terms of information as well. So, I mean, we're trying to plan so that we can have like some kind of internet radio station where, for example, we could interview you and get that aired and give people an option to hear things that they wouldn't hear. They certainly wouldn't hear it on the BBC in this country, which is supposed to be this wonderful institution, but the only people who talk about how wonderful it is are people who work for
Time was.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one way in which people can actually listen to things, hear information, and start to think for themselves about what's presented to them, and how there are so many things that are illusory around that would seem so powerful as well. I mean, there are really terrible things that happen in the world, don't get me wrong, but it's a way of undermining the power of the predominant culture, which is increasingly trying to, even now as we speak, restrict and control people all the time. And the more that this happens, the more that people have other options. And I've got a lot of hope, actually. I've been working with a lot of people in their early 20s recently, and it's quite interesting hearing what they have to say. Okay, they're not totally informed about a lot of things, and I have to sort of stand back a bit and not keep going on about, do you know about this, do you know about that, do you know about the other? But they are a lot of people are waking up in all sorts of ways, and there is fertile ground there, definitely.
I'd also like to say to not lose hope. I mean, I think the biggest stumbling block may be despondency,
Yes.
caused by the fact that this whole situation can seem so overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, like as we've been discussing how omnipresent it is and how it is almost spread homogenously across the world. We ourselves, we've seen that there's a neoclassical building literally within 100 yards of where we're sitting now, which is obviously a symbol of the old empire. We have a company in India, a British company in India, destroying a culture there. We have in Indonesia, you were saying, in the Philippines, wherever it was, they're doing the same thing again. And that's just one part of so much more: war, famine, poisoning of the environment, injustice, poverty. It's everywhere, and it can become overwhelming. It seems like some monster that can never be defeated. When in fact, it very often, I think, the whole monstrosity of it is in some senses a bravado called from the very, very empire that is creating it. They like the idea that they look on the all-powerful, when in fact they're facing a challenge today that they've never faced probably in all of human history. I mean, I can find examples everywhere, and sometimes the examples can appear in the most unlikely areas. For instance, there's a franchise of like workers shops run by workers cooperatives, local shops run by workers cooperatives called NISA, that's appeared in this country, and the NISA shops. It's very, very revealing. There's something very, very revealing behind this quite prosaic kind of institution. Look, on the surface it looks quite normal. It's a chain of corner shops. It's not a chain, it's a franchise. The shops are independently run. This means that the big corporations like Tesco are in trouble, and there is a market. People are looking at them and they're saying, no, I'm not going to go in there for ethical reasons. People are starting to think ethically in terms of how they buy things, and so there is a market. A market has obviously opened up for ethically run shops. And that's just one example.
I was reading this book by a biologist, and he's trying to explain why when a small group of fish is approaching a predator, they'll all of a sudden swerve and go around it like that. Boom. And there's no way that these hundreds of little fish are going to know where the one next to them is going to go, but they're all in perfect unison. Like the birds in the sky, they'll go and they swoop together. So they're acting like they have one mind. And what his theory is that every organism has a personal and also a collective consciousness.
Is that Sheldrake? Rupert Sheldrake?
And the collective consciousness can shift quickly if there's once you reach a critical mass, as everybody knows. Right.
Yeah, 100th monkey.
And it's true, I've seen it. Like all of a sudden, boom, people are just thinking differently. And there's no logical or scientific explanation. It's just that group mind, and we're affecting it now. I mean, I see the shift happening. It's not even about to happen, it's happening as we're sitting here.
It is
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
It's happening because where I work, we talk now. We people just talk, and even though they still have, everybody's got different opinion, different story, different reason for different beliefs. People are beginning to question things. People are beginning to notice things, to become aware of what is happening, which is really positive. My question though is it happening fast enough? Because I feel that things are so bad.
Yeah.
And I feel personally also, unfortunately, part of it. I still I fear things, because I do have a family, I do have responsibilities, so I would like to do something. But at the same time, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going into? But I just really feel very strongly about this. That's why I'm here. I just think this is basic, from a woman's point of view. Sorry, but, children, I think they've been the most oppressed and bombarded and, manipulated. It's not us, it's not the older generations. I think it's children who are really, really vulnerable in all senses, and this is just like the last drop, really.
So when you're saying you're feeling like you feel that you're held back by the fear.
Yeah, it's the money, it's the
Take the-
responsibility,
yeah.
it's that.
Well,
that's
I have a
what
little
it
bit I
is.
can share with you about that because I was in a very similar situation. And in a way I didn't have the choice because it was all taken from me. Because left to yourself, you're never going to make the choice to walk over your kids if you're human at all. You don't walk from your kids, you don't scuttle your livelihood, all that, right? But when it happened to me, I had to realize that I thought I was destroyed at first, right? I thought there was nothing left. Because they took away the two things that mattered most, my livelihood and calling and my family. Okay, when you got those two props, what do you have left? I found I was able to keep going because there was a third thing, which I didn't know was there. And that's the thing that they can't take from you. And we all find that in a different way. But sometimes we can find it when things are the worst in our lives. And I like the analogy, I mentioned this in my film. There was a Hindu philosopher, Krishnamurti, who said, and he uses God language, but he said, God hides himself in the poorest parts of ourselves. Like a seed, and then a bad circumstance will actually reveal that seed. And so at first, the fear blinds us to that because we can't see past the fear. But when you go through that, but for whatever reason, suddenly you realize it was an illusion. What can anyone ever take from me? And the biggest fear, of course, is our children. That hurts us more than anything that can happen to us. And that's why this strikes a chord with so many people. Because imagine a whole community where your children were taken away. Like one woman I knew once said, after the children were taken from the village, and the Mounties took all of them, including the 2 and 3-year-olds, right? There are no children in the village, and the life went out of the place. And he said the people sat on the beach for days and just sobbed. And their lives were ruined. I mean, okay, not accidentally. So how do you ever get over that? Well, the point is there are more. They're like that school of fish. There was more to them than just themselves and their own individual pain and fear. There was something higher. And this is what we're getting at. It's a thing that can't be broken. It's our spirit, our human spirit. And somehow we're able to be brought closer to that by these conditions of adversity. And the main ingredient is not to stay in your personal isolation. When you have that personal fear, you go with others who are facing it as well and say, how do we get through this? What can we do to break through fear? And I'll give you an anecdote of how that happened for one Native man. He was a survivor of a Catholic school. His name was William Coons. And he was a survivor of the Catholic Indian boarding schools. And whenever we held a protest, he couldn't come to it because he'd see a cross and he'd get sick, right? Physically ill, right? Because of everything that had happened to him. But one day we held this big rally at a Catholic church in downtown Vancouver. And he came up, he was about to turn away, and then he saw all of us there, and he thought, I can't let them down. They're expecting me there because we wanted him to speak that day. So he didn't want to let us down, so we went a little bit closer. And then once he got there, he saw some friends, and he saw they weren't afraid. They were laughing, as a matter of fact, despite that the cops were there, right? And the priest was going in, and all these authority symbols, they didn't seem to be scared. So that gave him courage to go a little bit further. Then the next Sunday when we came back, and I think I do believe in miracles because the church door was standing open. There were no cops and no private security. They were just gone. So I said, this is a sign, let's go. So we walked into the church during the Mass with our banner about that all the children need a proper burial banner. And we just quietly stood at the front of the church during the Mass with this banner, right? And everybody in the pew were like, whoa, is this part of the service? Like, what's going on here? It's really interesting. The priests were really freaking out, and they were calling the police, and they were like saying, you gotta get out of here. And we just stood there quietly with a lot of dignity. And then the native elders started drumming in memory of the children, and these drums were kind of going through the whole cathedral, right? And we started a procession out, and you know what people did? They all stood up. Everybody, all those the people in Catholic Church, they all stood up. And I knew at that point that we had won their hearts because we were just speaking about the children, right? And we walked out, and I noticed that William was with us. And I said, my God, you went into the church? And he said, yeah, I was handing out stuff to everybody in the pews. And when he said that, there was such joy in his eyes, like, I'm one. He had broke through, and he didn't do it by himself. He didn't do it by a counselor or looking on YouTube or anything. He did it because we were all together, and we heal together, and we do it in action, where you feel I can do something about this. I'm not a victim anymore, right? and that's, that had such a reverberation. All the media reported it. Within the month, the Prime Minister was making noises